This is Digital Music Trends, episode 120, recorded on the 14th of February 2013. So hello everyone and welcome to Digital Music Trends, a weekly show covering the latest news in the digital music industry. Digital Music Trend is available in audio and video formats on a variety of platforms including iTunes, RSS, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Mixcloud, TuneIn Radio and more. So this week I'm thrilled to welcome back to the show Taishi Fukuyama, Managing Director at All Access Today Japan, a company that specializes in building bridges for US startups to enter the Asian market. So hi Taishi and welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hi Andre, it's great to be back.
And it's great to have you from LA this time, not from Tokyo. And right. Also back on the show, it's great to welcome Sam Taylor, who amongst other things works at CMU and on the Great Escape Conference. So hi Sam, and how's it going?
Hey, good, thanks, yeah.
Great, awesome. Well, I'm glad we could make it. And so this week we have to talk about a few things. So we got Pandora, BPI, Apple's iTunes, Audio, Universal Music Publishing, eMusic, Parlophone, and Daisy, and all sorts of other stuff. So we'll just have to go through it as quickly as we can. So let's start with the first story then. Last Friday, Pandora revealed its listening metrics for January. So the company has seen exceptional growth year over year with a 38% increase in listeners compared to January 2012. And listening hours also grew exponentially by 47%. But the problems kind of arise when you start doing a comparison between January 2013 and December 2012. So two consecutive months. Since the service actually registered a loss of 1.5 million active listeners, whilst maintaining the same number of streams. So what do you guys reckon about this drop? Like a few people have thought that this could be related to the holiday season, maybe people listening to more tracks in December than they would in January for some reason. Although it's not really a product, so it's not like they were selling anything in December. It's more a use case scenario. And do you think there's anything to this slump other than the holiday season? So something that is actually more of a plateau for the company? So Sam, what do you reckon about that?
I guess with services like that, there are more and more people coming into the market and it's becoming more significant. Also, you know, Pandora have, over the past few months, had some issues with press and the attitude of the company towards how they pay out to artists and so on. So, you know, in an increasingly crowded market for streaming and digital music services in general, I don't think it's a surprise that one of the major players, as things evolve, sees a big slump in its numbers, particularly in light, I guess, of the kind of PR issues that they've had over the past few months.
Absolutely. And Taishi, what's your take on Pandora? Have you, what's your first-hand experience in the US of the service?
Well, yeah, it's interesting to hear, for example, your guys' opinion on this because we don't have a lot of streaming services yet in Japan.
Yeah.
With my limited experience, using them and just, following the numbers from overseas, it's, it seems to be like a minor hiccup. I understand that there are some press issues and, for example, like publishing companies like withdrawing their licenses, from ASCAP BPI and all that. That was an interesting story that I read. That you had sent me about that, and how Sony had renegotiated, their deal with Pandora so quickly.
Yeah.
After doing so, it's definitely one of the major, the major, I guess, internet radio services, and it looks like it's just a little tiny hiccup from abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the one thing that I was looking at is the numbers, is in the sense that if you look at the population in the US, it's just over 300 million people, and Pandora has got, it's registering about 65 million sort of users using the service a month. So it's already like a really big market share. I'm just wondering whether, like, how much more room for expansion they have amongst the US population. It's kind of...
well, it is projected to be like humongous growth just within the U.S. this year.
Yeah,
I believe. I guess it's all due to like connected televisions and cars and all that.
Yeah.
Going into different living rooms and besides the apps and web. Yeah. Which is interesting territory for everybody, I guess, right now.
Yeah, and Apple also is an interesting player because I mean everybody's talking about market growth in the States, but more than market growth for one service, I'm wondering whether it's going to be more of a market growth for the actual radio market. and more of a diversification of the platforms that are becoming prominent over there. So everybody's giving Apple's entry into this market as something that is all but certain for this year. Which is sort of like something that surfaced only in the last few weeks. I keep seeing articles about people saying that this is going to happen. But the only thing that people are also pointing out is that it could be a little bit confusing for consumers, because now Apple has got the iTunes Match service in the US. And so if they launch a radio service, the question is, how do they place it so that it's differentiated enough from the iTunes Match service that people understand how it works and get to use it. So do you guys reckon that this is going to be a bit of a problem for them to try and really stand out as a radio service as opposed to like just a cloud matching service? Taishi, what do you reckon?
I think it's a good idea to launch it. I mean, you really got to diversify your risk here. So you don't want to do just mix and match, match iTunes Match either. And the interesting about Apple is that you have the download iTunes service now that they're entering radio, but you got to remember they also do games, they're doing apps, they're doing books as well. So that whole ecosystem just makes Apple a lot stronger at the end of the day, I think, because you can do subscription service that cross genres into different kind of content. Just because we're talking about music doesn't mean that an Apple can't do a subscription for books and music and video.
Yeah. Sam, what do you reckon? Do you reckon that Apple could make it a little bit confusing if they come out with a radio streaming service with the iTunes Match offering already in place?
I think for a lot of people, and it's something that we once discussed before on your podcast, that streaming services are pretty much commodity services. There's nothing that really locks people in. Obviously, Apple, with their existing ecosystem, it's a bit of a no-brainer for a lot of people. If Apple suddenly go, hey, we've got this streaming service and it's available on your Mac and it's on your iPad and it's on your iPhone, and that's music and it's film and all the rest of it, for a lot of people, they're going to go, yeah, that's fine. And obviously that takes them into direct competition with Pandora, but also people like Netflix as well. And again, I think it's this week that in the UK, Tesco have launched their streaming service, which includes music and movies.
Yeah.
And so if Apple can come up and say, hey, we have this, and it works really well, and it hooks in with all your existing devices, that could cannibalize a lot of Pandora's share of the market, certainly, but potentially also eat into people like Netflix as well. And that's when it then becomes a more interesting play, because obviously Apple have some of those deals in place already with the movie studios. They've got deals in place with the labels already. So taking that, obviously you need to negotiate different deals for streaming, but it still puts them in a very powerful position. And for a lot of people, I think that would be the obvious service to go, because it's already there on your desktop computer and on your mobile devices. So if it's just a matter of switching something on, your billing stuff is already there even. So it's just like ping, and it's there. So yeah.
No, that's right. And Apple also is interesting because they've done their first couple of car deals. I think last week it was announced. I can't remember the brands they went with, but it's some sort of Siri integration within the car system for hands-free type mode, a la Microsoft, a la Ford, I guess, the Ford Sync.
I think also one of the very interesting pieces of speculation I saw about Apple was this notion that you could have localized networks of sharing. So you're in a room, you're in your office, whatever, other people have their iDevices there. You can look at the music, share it across a localized network, spin up networks, listen to other people's music, go away, spin up another network at a party or in a bar or whatever. And I think Apple, we could see Apple adding something a little bit more interesting and a little bit more social around devices onto that. And again, that could be an interesting play, whether or not it's something that a lot of the speculation about these things and about streaming in general, I often wonder whether they are actually things that consumers have interest in, or whether it's people frantically trying to differentiate their streaming services from each other because there is no real lock-in.
Yeah, of course. And Taishi, you were talking about in the prep about a couple of stories. We were talking about Japan and what's happening over there. So the first story that came out actually literally like an hour ago was the fact that the iPhone was announced as the best-selling mobile phone in Japan for 2012, and this is an interesting news because it really marks sort of Japan as moving forward from proprietary devices that were really the vast majority to really opening up to Android and iPhone as platforms that are viable, which makes it also interesting from a digital music point of view because of all the options that the iOS platform affords. So what has been your experience in the past year of the growth of this platform?
So the headline was that iPhone was the most selling handset, but I haven't seen all the details because there might be that that Japan has so many Japan specific Android devices.
Yeah.
That all in all that probably the OS Android is more popular.
Yeah.
It's just that the devices there's so many that if you just look at the numbers, iPhone was the dominant one.
Yeah.
So, but I think right now there are like over 70% of all smartphones that are being sold are all either Android or iPhone.
Yeah.
So it's definitely changing very quickly. And another thing that we just briefly discussed was like, for example, like even Apple, let's say they do like a music and video subscription, music and books. Like Japan is starting to do that right now.
Yeah.
Carriers are launching their services. And that's an interesting play. And they took it another step forward by opening up, for example, you have Verizon customers, Verizon making a streaming service that AT&T subscribers can, play into. And
that's super interesting, yeah.
I thought that was something very interesting. They're opening up their services to different carriers. And I was gonna add about what Sam was saying about Apple is that one thing that they hadn't been so successful in was getting that social element into their services, right?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, it'll be interesting if they can finally nail that, or decide to really just go all content and just be the master of the the ecosystem part.
Yeah, absolutely, and Facebook is a key player in that because they have actually made up now after they fell out a couple of years ago. So that's going to be an interesting thing to see if they integrate Facebook into their new rumored music offering.
Right.
And also there was another bit of news on Apple, and I don't want to go on about Apple for ages, but Apple revealed that it reached 25 billion iTunes downloads for tracks, which was a huge milestone for them, of course. And Billboard reports that iTunes now averages about 15,000 tracks downloaded per minute, which is really a huge number. And it also holds the #1 spot for music sales with a 29% overall of recorded music sales and 69% of the digital market. I assume these are US figures. So both really show how dominant iTunes still is for consumers. And but the question is always the same. A lot of people are talking about a plateau for digital music sales. On the other side, the more devices that Apple sells, the more tracks it actually seems to be able to sell as well. Because as the devices go more mainstream, they go in the hands of more people that wouldn't necessarily have them before. They actually go and discover the iTunes store and they buy music from that. But there's also growth on a territorial level because iTunes is expanding every 2 or 3 weeks. We hear about new countries being added to the to the iTunes ecosystem, which makes it a really interesting proposition. Of course, the more countries that are on board, the more iTunes can sell tracks. So, where do you reckon the growth is going to come from for them? From international expansion, more, or from the simple sheer growth of the platform and the sales of devices? Sam?
I think there are a few interesting things there. Obviously, the more devices Apple sell, the more desirable it becomes.
Yeah.
You know, there's a distinct pattern of people see people using iPhones, they go, yeah, that works well, I want one of them. So there's probably still room for Apple to sell more devices. We hear all the time about they may introduce, say, a slightly lesser high-spec iPhone. They did it with the iPad mini. And you know, I think there's still plenty of room for them to sell more devices and get people hooked into the Apple ecosystem. But at the same time, I think, yeah, there's room for international expansion, but it also kind of cuts across the market because the more prevalent it comes for people to consume their music through these kinds of devices, there's a growth for Android as well. And so services like 7 Digital, who seem more and more to be the de facto iTunes equivalent for buying music on an iPhone, on an Android device, there's a growth for them as well. So it then becomes a question of Apple using iTunes and trying to wrestle control of both the device market and the download market, because I think those two are kind of inextricably linked a lot of the time. As they expand internationally, there's potential there to go into territories where possibly that sort of consumer buy-in into consuming music through your phone, downloading tracks through iTunes hasn't quite taken off yet. So there's probably huge potential there. And I guess the really exciting thing is, which I don't really hear talked about a lot, people talk about streaming services paying out however much to labels and so on. But the interesting thing is that when people are buying their music through iTunes, that is real money. That's money coming directly out of consumers' pockets. A lot of the time, the money that seems to be being paid out by streaming services is VC. It's not actually consumers paying for that money. And so there's quite an interesting thing going on here, that iTunes and Apple are getting a bigger and bigger share of kind of that whole universe, and that's real money, which puts them, if they want to talk about setting up their own streaming service or whatever, it puts them in a very, very powerful position. Because with the other streaming services, if the VC suddenly dries up, what the hell happens? That money that is going through iTunes and Apple is real money going direct to labels, and I think that's fascinating because it puts them in a completely different position to any other player in the market at the moment.
As usual, this almost every week we talk quite a bit about streaming services. So one figure that talking about mobile and how people are using streaming services that is quite interesting is that Music Ally published an interview with Scott Bugbee, Ardio's head of strategic partnerships, and he revealed the fact that actually 80% of Ardio's users are mobile users. I thought that was a super interesting fact, just looked at in the context of how streaming services are placing themselves and are trying to sell the service. I mean, the number one issue that I can see, for example, is that Ardio has just opened up its 6-month free trial to a number of new territories, aside from the US, which was where the offer was originally placed. But these 6 months free trials are for the desktop version only, whilst the mobile version is only 7 days. So if 80% of the users are on mobile, how effective is it this 6 months to really hook people? And wouldn't it be easier to just extend the 7 days mobile trial by like 2 or 3 more weeks to actually get users to fully experience the service? I mean, it might be a silly thing to say, but I don't know. I just thought I'd make that point and see what you guys think.
I think they'd be eating into their own revenue if they did that, though, because, I mean, certainly for me and a lot of people I know, I use Spotify rather than Audio, but I keep on thinking, oh, maybe I'll subscribe to Spotify Premium rather than just the desktop version, because it would be nice to have music on the go. And certainly there's kind of that gateway effect of you use the desktop version, you have all your playlists set up, and then you walk away from your desk and you're like, oh, I'd like to be able to take that with me on the train or on the bus or whatever. So I think they're probably doing it right. give people almost unrestricted access to the desktop version, and charge the premium to be able to take your music with you. And if that's working for them, if they're already getting 80% of their revenue from mobile, I don't see why they'd extend people's free trial of mobile at all, because people are coughing up, and that's probably as they get the playthrough from desktop, people get a little bit tied in by setting up their playlists or discovering that they suddenly have all this music untapped. They can listen to anything, and they want to pay. So yeah, I
guess my question is on the actual user base, in the sense that if people are so interested in mobile, will they be really that bothered about the desktop version being such a long free trial, which of course also costs the company money, and wouldn't they be more inclined to get addicted to the service if they had a slightly longer mobile trial? But you're absolutely right in the sense that that would be financially even more burdensome, and it would be tough to upsell if you have the opportunity of free for longer.
And I suspect they probably, they you would hope, have done the maths in-house. And so someone has sat and gone, this is the point at which it makes sense to cut that free trial. And also, I guess, there would be nothing to stop you, unless you have to put in your card details at the beginning of the free trial. There would be nothing to stop people having a month's free trial of mobile and then cancelling it and then registering with a different email address or whatever. So, it's one of those things.
It's one of those things. And Taishi, what do you reckon about the 6 months free trial in a number of countries? That's a big gamble because they don't have any advertising, so it could really burn up cash quick.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what it is. It's a gamble. It should be a good test to see what a service like RDO that's not as popular as some of those big hit, like Deezer or Spotify is, to see like they're trying to grab still early adopters that understand what music streaming services are. So I think a lot of these people find these services on mobile because it's just easier to find. Their apps. You have a very direct, you know what you're looking for, I think, better on a mobile device than when you're just like on your laptop searching and you just start to surf and wander off. In general. So like, and then if you can like look for other services that if you run out of your free points or whatever. So it's very understandable that a service like RDO has more users on mobile, and obviously it's definitely it should be a lot more easier to monetize for a mobile subscription in a lot of ways. So 6 months I think is a lot of time to say we need 6 months. If you need 6 months to understand the service, I think there's something. I'm not gonna say there's something wrong with your service, but it should be a lot easier, and it's going to. These companies are gonna try and hook you on like day one, from a year from now, it's gonna be like everyone's gonna, well, not everyone, but there will be a lot more people that understand these services, and if it's gonna take you 6 months to hook someone on, I think that's gonna be a big problem.
I think maybe for a lot of people, I keep having this conversation with friends that I certainly, and my friends, a lot of those people exist in the little bubble of the music industry where stuff like this just makes sense. But actually, maybe for run-of-the-mill music consumers, it does actually take them 6 months or so to see the value in a service like that, because to begin with, they start out just going, whatever the last album they bought was, putting that in and listening to it, and they're like, well, so what? And it's only as they begin to talk to other people and explore the possibilities that are presented by being able to listen to anything you want at any time that they see the value in it and move towards going, that is something I would pay for. And there's quite a big psychological leap going from, I'm buying music and I own that music, to I'm renting the music and that gives me access to more. But for sort of run-of-the-mill music consumers to understand that maybe does take up to 6 months. So maybe they're doing a really clever thing there, that they're widening their market. A lot of people, I know with Spotify at the beginning, they were quite upset when it was limited to 20 hours of free listening and things like that.
Yeah.
So quite possibly just by going, hey, do it however you want to for 6 months, fiddle around with it, listen to the stuff you want to listen to, get used to this process. That's maybe a really bright move on their part.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Well, can I just add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I totally agree with Sam there that it does take the run-of-the-mill music consumer more time than for example, one of us. But the thing is that if I were running a music streaming service, I wouldn't want to give out 6 months and say, we hope within those 6 months you'll understand and you fall in love with us, and then if you don't, we pretty much can't give you any more time to try us out. So the fact that Spotify did limit, for example, X number of hours of free music, was it monthly or weekly or day?
I think it varies by country as well.
20 hours a month, didn't they?
It's 20 hours a month.
Yeah.
See, but then you can try it for 20 hours free a month for as long as you want. They'll hate you for if they start charging for the 21st hour. But that hate for some people is a love-hate thing, isn't it? So they'll start paying to stop hating Spotify. Is what I'm trying to say.
I think also, I think the point that you were making earlier was important, that if it takes you 6 months to get your head around a streaming service, maybe there's something wrong with your streaming service. And I guess there is that thing that at the moment there is, and I've talked about this earlier today, there is nothing compelling that differentiates streaming services. So maybe there needs to be that killer feature that makes people go, wow, okay, just take my money.
Yeah.
Again, I guess with coming back to Netflix, the killer feature for them was the recommendation and being able to automatically cue stuff that it knew that you would want to watch next. So you didn't have to make the decision. And I guess a lot of people at the moment are talking about discovery and curation, and when you are faced with the ability to listen to anything, how do you begin to work out what you want to listen to? I'm not necessarily convinced that consumers do want discovery and curation as a sort of add-on to services, but maybe if someone can really crack that and really get it right, the sell for consumers suddenly doesn't become a 6 month thing of, oh, let me get used to this and let me see the value in it. Yeah. It turns into, here's a month, take my money, I want to pay for this.
Yeah, and I mean, just to look at some of the numbers, the BPI released an official report about 2012 in the UK, and some of the major numbers, everybody's read about them. The growth in digital music, of course, and all that. The streaming market is growing in the UK. It's £49 million in 2012, which is 15% of the digital market. But looking at beside the big numbers from the BPI report, which you can find on bpi.co.uk, I was quite fascinated by a couple of the other stats that they had on the branding recognition, brand awareness of the streaming services. Just to look at the UK, Spotify has got 68.8%, Napster has got 63.8%, although I wonder whether that's more due to its history rather than its actually having a service. And then Last.fm is third with 34.4%, and after all, Last.fm has been around for a very long time in digital music, so I think people must have heard about it at some point. But then there's a huge gap when you look at Deezer, Tesco's owned We7 and Audio, which are trailing behind at 13%, 12.8% and 11.7% respectively as brand awareness. And so basically Spotify is killing it, that's 68.8%. It's so far ahead of the other services that you just wonder, you kind of understand why audio has to make such a big push, because at this point, if you don't get critical mass with these services, they don't work.
Yeah.
And to get critical mass, I guess you have to offer as much as you can feasibly financially offer to the users at this point.
I think the interesting thing there is that for a lot of people I talk to, streaming Spotify has become synonymous with streaming music. Yep. In the same way that there are lots of other video streaming platforms, but very, very quickly, very early on, YouTube became synonymous with streaming video. So you talk to people about YouTube, they understand what you're talking about. Now, for a lot of people who even aren't particularly into music, or maybe don't even use Spotify, you say Spotify, they know what that means. Yeah. And so, Deezer and Rdio have a huge amount of work to catch up. And I wonder if in the UK they can, or whether Spotify just has too much momentum. The thing that surprised me was Last FM.
Yeah.
I was surprised how low that was, actually, because, for a long time, Last FM have been around. For a lot of people, maybe 5 years ago, Last FM was the way they streamed music, and the Last FM radio service. Obviously, it's quite different to Spotify. Yeah. So things have kind of evolved and changed. Tesco and V7, I'm not surprised about at all, because I just don't think of it, and I think they've rebranded it now as Blinkbox.
Yeah,
I think they've bundled that in. And there's lots of adverts on the Tube, and I've seen poster campaigns and so on. But at the same time, when I think of streaming, I just don't think of Tesco.
Yeah, yeah. And Taishi, when a service gets to almost 70% brand awareness and you're at 10%, what do you think is your outlook?
Well, you can't be doing the same thing, that's for sure. Yeah, like Sam was saying, there aren't going to be 4 or 5 major music streaming services, and at most probably 3.
Yeah.
And they're going to be, the other ones are going to be well funded and dying out, or they'll just have to work out a niche, like strong in a certain genre, or like, for example, like maybe there could be a music streaming service just for classical, just for jazz, stuff like this.
Yeah.
And a Pandora, like something like that, just for that genre or something. And I think that could totally work. I know.
I think that's quite a good idea, actually, because maybe if a service could have, you can get that streaming content anywhere, but maybe if they can have custom added content. So if it's classical, maybe it's. I downloaded a fantastic iPad app that lets you listen to the Goldberg variations and follow along with the score.
Oh, cool.
So, I mean, it's really, really cool. It's beautifully designed. Maybe for a classical streaming service, they have to add in something like that is going to appeal to the demographic who are using it. Maybe for a jazz service, again, the Blue Note app on the iPad is fantastic. So maybe there's potential there. If it's a pop service or a metal one, maybe you have sort of behind the scenes backstage content from the artists that particular demographic is going to love, and maybe that is how they begin to differentiate themselves. So I think that.
Yeah, like you were saying,
it's really interesting idea, actually.
Yeah, YouTube being synonymous for video is going to happen eventually for music. Yeah, I think.
All right, so on the show, I haven't actually had a chance to talk about the Parlophone purchase by Warner yet, although we'd covered the acquisition of EMI in quite some details a few months back. So Warner Music Group ended up purchasing the meatiest part of the assets Universal had to divest from the acquisition of EMI, and the move was actually welcomed by most, including in indie labels, strangely, because they were quite happy that, in a way, this restores a little bit of balance in terms of market shares between the 3 majors remaining. It was also welcomed by a few of the Parlophone artists that I guess are happy to end up in an actual label rather than ending up somewhere random or with a company that is just making an investment rather than wanting to buy a music company or wanting to be a label, really. I guess on the digital front, what's interesting about the acquisition of Parlophone by Warner is the fact that really something that Paul Resnikoff actually pointed out in Digital Music News. It's not just the fact that it reestablishes balance, but it also makes the licensing situation in a way even a little harder for digital companies, because now all three majors have very meaty, weighty catalogs, which means that all three majors are essential for a digital service to actually get online. So it's not really enough to have two at this point. You have to have all three to launch a service that is viable. So do you guys reckon this is gonna make it more difficult for companies to launch with a digital service, and will Warner really be able to throw its weight around a little more now that it has this huge acquisition in the wings? Taishi?
That's a tough one, but I'd say for any digital company to have some sort of uphill battle with labels, getting licensed should be welcomed.
Yeah.
So if anyone's complaining about that, too bad for them.
Yeah.
I think. So yeah, I welcome it, and I think overall having I think it was like two. I forgot what the quote was, but having more like three is better than two at this point.
Yeah.
When digital, when apps go up, music go up, that will happen too.
Yeah.
And I think there'll be a point where licensing music, it's just because it's new and catalogs are moving around still, but there'll come a time where I think there'll be a more standard format to license music for apps and all that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in a way, it's great that there is a little bit of balance that is happening with the majors, but at the same time, it's still only three companies that really hold the keys to being able to have a proper digital music service. So that's going to be an interesting one anyway. Another story that I wanted to talk about today was the Grammys story, which was interesting. So Alice van Buskirk from Evolver.fm wrote a pretty interesting overview of how accurate Spotify and Shazam were in their Grammy predictions. So it actually looks like we're pretty close. So Shazam was right 69% of the time with 11 out of 16 predictions, and narrowly beating Spotify. They got 67% with 4 out of 6. Although Shazam was actually, if you think about it, a lot more accurate because it did more predictions and they got more right, I guess, rather than doing only 6. So they were pretty damn good at working out who would win. And it's not surprising really, because like if you look at the idea of people actually getting so excited about a track they would actually put their phone out and Shazam it, that's a pretty powerful thing. And so if you get enough of those, then you can probably predict pretty well what are the tracks that are making the most impact on people. So do you guys reckon that this is like the next step into predicting stuff like this? And as compared to, for example, the old way, which was looking at music sales and trying to predict it that way, and do you think that that's going to be an interesting way for companies like the Grammy Awards as well to incorporate some of this stuff into the awards maybe at some point?
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, sure.
I think it's only natural. I kind of don't even understand what the point is actually that that they're so accurate. It should be. It should be,
yeah.
It should be, and that the fact that people are adopting new ways to consume music is obviously natural, and where consumption is like focused, that's where these nominees and winners are selected from. So I think it's only natural, and like yeah. So what's the point?
What's the point? Yeah, I mean, I guess the surprise is from the fact that perhaps because it's based on how much people really stream the tracks. It's interesting because when you were talking about sales, it didn't necessarily mean that people were actually listening to the track a lot. It was more a question of people buying the track, and then if it was a dud or if an album was a dud, then maybe they wouldn't do it. But they wouldn't actually want to vote for it. But the fact that it's based on the fact that people are either tagging a track on the go or actually streaming the track, then it makes it a little bit more accurate, perhaps, on that front.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. Like the way you're consuming music has just changed.
Yeah.
It's not sales, it's streaming, it's tagging, it's sharing. It's only natural that the way these artists get selected changes with it, I guess.
Yeah, of course. And is Sam around? Sam?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
Okay, cool. So Sam, what's your take on this? Do you reckon, as Taishi said, it's only natural that this is happening, or is it like an interesting evolution on the perspective of predictions for this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it is only natural. When you have data and when you can look at that data and when you can draw assumptions from that data, yeah, you should be able to make predictions. There's the really interesting thing that was revealed recently. There's a really strong correlation between Wikipedia page views for artists and album sales. So yeah, I think it's perfectly natural that you take data from your streaming services and make predictions. At the same time, I don't really know if there's much value in that.
Yeah.
It's a nice gimmick.
I wanted to end the show by talking about the last news, which is talking about Daisy. So there was some juicy news about Daisy this week, as Alex Pham from Billboard reports. So the project, now headed by Ian Rogers with the help of Trent Reznor as creative officer, is now planning to launch in the summer, which is pretty early, really. I thought it was going to be more like end of Q3, beginning of Q4. So amongst the interesting revelations that were made this week is that they have 100 people working on playlists now. So that's a lot of people that are working on creating ad hoc playlists, which will be run alongside algorithms to create a bespoke service for consumers and bespoke playlists. And also, interestingly, they talked about how they actually maintained a lot of the technology infrastructure of Moog, but they're basically doing a huge makeover of the front end, which is going to become Daisy with the whole curation side added to it. So the first side is talking about the way they're organizing themselves. So Taishi, do you reckon that this is an interesting way of looking at it? And it's almost like Pandora-like in the way that they're doing it, because looking at having a ton of people that are organizing and tagging music, it's very much similar to what Pandora was doing before, right?
The music genome aspect, you mean?
Yeah, the human involvement, I guess, having so many people that are working on this all together.
Yeah, and I think the playlist model is already proven to some extent. So it's interesting, that they went that way. Instead of trying to reinvent something. Yeah. And they're obviously they're very almost infamous to be that aggressive to launch and start this way. So being involved with hardware is something that in this way it should be a very good competitive edge against different services.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And and it's also interesting that they managed to maintain the majority of the staff. So now they have 100 people working on the playlists, and they also have retained 99% of the engineering staff, which was about 50 people. So it's really a big enterprise, a big investment, and it's going to be super interesting to see how they decide to position themselves to enter the market, perhaps alongside Beats, to try and gain some market share, going from almost zero at this point.
Right. So I think they'll have to play into the hardware play. Well, without a doubt. And I'm not even sure if it's going to be about a streaming service. For example, like how Beats, was never really about high fidelity headphones.
Yeah.
Right. So if they learn something from that, it should be that it shouldn't be about a streaming service at all, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Well, I think that gets us to the end of the show. We had a myriad of technical problems, and hopefully in the edit I will be able to get rid of some of them, but probably not all of them. Well, thank you so much, Taishi and Sam, who is unfortunately offline at the moment, for being on the show. I can plug on Sam's behalf the Great Escape Festival. They've announced the first few keynotes for the convention just today, and some of the bands earlier this week, so you should check out Escape Great. And also, Taishi, anything you want to plug your end?
I will be attending SF Music Tech Summit
Yeah.
and South by Southwest. So if our company also books bands too, and are event promoters in Japan and all across Asia. So if you're a band or a technology company, I would love to meet you.
Great, awesome, and it's all access today Japan. Can you give us the website for it?
Yes, it's aatj.jp.
Okay, perfect, awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, and I hope to have you again soon in better technical circumstances.
Yes,
that's
yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Cheers.